Hello, this is Brian Scuttle with Sonic Cinema. I recently did some interviews with writer director Jeffrey Brown and producer Sophia Lin on their upcoming Shudder horror film called The Beach House. It debuts on Thursday, July 9th, and it was really a pleasure to talk to him about the movie. It's a really entertaining, interesting horror movie about a couple that goes to the family beach house, and they find that they're not alone there, and then they also find out that other strange things are happening, and it goes from there. I don't want to spoil it. You can read my review for a little bit more about it, but I was pleased to talk to Jeffrey and Sophia about the project, and I hope you enjoy those interviews. And the first question, I guess, is for Jeff. What was the inspiration behind the story for the beach house?
The earliest kind of idea for it kind of came from a production standpoint, which was to make something with a limited amount of characters in a one location. Mm-hmm. So it's four characters, one location, which to any aspiring writers, I would not recommend that approach to writing. But then I think the idea of setting something at a beach house actually came from a trip to the Jersey Shore, where there were, and not the Jersey Shore of the reality show, but kind of
right.
There's other areas where they have older houses, and I think I was talking to a friend. I don't think it was you, Soph. I think it was Deidre Lano or somebody like that, and we were talking about how great all of these old beach houses were. And, it would be cool to set a movie primarily in them because they have such great character. And also at that time, Sophia and I worked on indie movies, and there was a whole movement called Indigent where they would make movies for like $300,000 in 15 days. And so that was kind of the early idea of kind of the frame of it. And then years later, we came back to it. And I think Soph and I actually had a dinner and we're talking about making like our own, like a small movie. And I'd written some ideas for this years ago. And then I just kind of went back and started writing it again. And one big thing was my wife's sister was getting married in New Orleans. And I went to the aquarium at New Orleans to kill some time. And I was just staring at jellyfish for like, and there was something, I was like, what does a jellyfish think? Like, what is it thinking about? Or like, which is, it's ludicrous, but then that was kind of like the spark that went through many kind of iterations over, 9-ish, or the writing was about 3 or 4 years until we wound up, you kind of shoot for the moon at first, then you kind of, pare it back, and then it became kind of what it is. And Sophia's always kind of logic for notes. She's always like, I hate horror movies when people are like, why would you do that? And so we try to avoid that sensibility. But also one other thing, while, Sophia's within earshot, some of the earlier drafts were kind of drifting more towards like something more conventional in a way. And she was always like, if we're going to make a small movie, she's like, don't be conventional. Like, you can do that late, that's what you do later. But like right now, make it go all out. And, I think that was another great kind of theme or input or, kind of through line to the making of the movie. I think that's about that. And so it's kind of those two, the production, a small movie, with necessity being the mother of invention, added to staring at jellyfish.
Sophia, what was it about Jeffrey's vision for the movie that drew you to produce it with him?
Well, yeah, as Jeff said, we coming from a production background, like I think we might have a little more ground. We might approach projects with a little more grounding than typical, screenwriter producer combo, because we've just seen over the years so many times, like scripts that were too ambitious for the level of production, that really suffered from not being able to be executed. And so it's a little bit of a backwards approach, but the intention was to get the movie made. As a producer, as any kind of aspiring filmmaker can tell you, it's virtually impossible to get any movie made. And so if you try to, we were just trying to find ways to make it more achievable.
Mm-hmm.
And not long prior to my joining and to start working with Jeff on this project, I had actually teamed up with one of the other producers on the Beach House, Tyler Davidson, and we had shot Take Shelter for an amount of money that is quite a bit lower than what is widely reported. And then subsequently I made a film with Craig Zobel called Compliance, and it was a very similar approach where it was like, well, if we don't want to wait 2 to 3 years to try to get name actors to justify a multi-million-dollar price tag, how do we get the film done? What's the opposite approach? And so the question becomes, well, what's the smallest version of the movie that you can make, and then we can just do whatever we want,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how you can have very trippy visual and oral kind of sequences like in the Beach House, or for Compliance, you can cast just the best actor you want and you wind up with Ann Dowd, instead of chasing actors who don't have the time for you. So it is a little bit kind of production oriented, but I feel like keeping the idea of the story in mind and wanting it to be effectively creepy, scary, horrifying, and atmospheric, all of Jeff's priorities, like making sure that we made that those were front of mind, I think was what we were hoping for. So,
Jeff, what were there any particular cinematic influences with the Beach House? Because when I was watching the film, I couldn't help but think of the fog and the mist when it came to just the basic idea of the film.
It's funny. Part of my process is I make something that's called a recipe, essentially. And it's just kind of a catalog of images, movies, albums, books, stories, pretty much anything I come across that it's like I want to take from this or from that, or, and then the recipe on the Beach House, I think is about ended up being around 5 or 6 pages long. And it's primarily in the scripting and the, get it all in the prep stage. Once you start shooting, all that stuff really doesn't matter. In a weird way. Like, you're not sitting there with images of a movie while you're shooting the film. You're like in the moment. So it's like, but in terms of the prep, the fog and the mist, the thing about the fog is, I love John Carpenter. John Carpenter is one of those kind of directors for people around my age. I'm in my early 40s, and he is, he's inescapable for horror films. He's just such a titanic influence. Him and David Cronenberg and David Lynch, and even George Romero, to some extent, they're there. There's nothing, you can't really do that. And of all of Carpenter's movies, and I think I've seen all of them, The Fog is not one of my favorites. And so I think it was more of, when I see a movie like that, it's like, well, what would I do differently to make this into a movie that I would enjoy more? Because it's like, I love the opening sequence of The Fog, where if the titles, I think, were great, but then once it gets into the story, I'm like, it doesn't quite work for me. Like Prince of Darkness, I love Prince of Darkness of his films. I think that's one of the more underrated ones, even though it's in Beach House, but it's really not. And The Mist too. The Mist is, I think, an excellent, Stephen King movie. But I think a big one was, like, to be honest, was Alien. The original Alien was very big, and then the early Cronenberg films like Shivers, especially. I went and saw that on the big screen. I think when we were in prep, it was playing somewhere, and Rabid and The Brood, and then even some kind of non-horror films too. But like not to get super arty, but Antonioni has amazing fog sequences in some of his movies, and so that was like Red Desert and Identification of a Woman have amazing fog, and I really got into fog, watching fog scenes in movies where I'd be like, oh, that's a good one. I think in early prep, there was one really foggy day in Cape Cod, and I was like, I hope it's like this all the time, but wishful thinking.
Well, this is for both of you. What were some of the challenges you had in producing when it came to the actual filming of this?
So you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, the biggest one. So we shot it in essentially 3 6-day weeks, but we had 2 days off, so it's not like. But the hardest thing, when you shoot a normal movie, the biggest consideration is rain. It's like if it's raining, you go to cover. And since we didn't have, the house was essentially cover. So like if it was pouring rain, we would go to the house. On top of rain, we were also looking. We shot off season, so it was pretty cold, and we needed clear days to make it look warm. So then that was another consideration. It's like, what days is it going to be really sunny? Then, if you're going to shoot with fog machines, if you have wind that's over 3 miles an hour, it is not going to work. So then we were also looking for days where it wouldn't be windy. And then on top of that, Cape Cod has insane tides. So to get some shots that involve the right the right depth of water, we would have to time it according to the tides. And our assistant director and some of the locations guys did studies of the times of the tides. And part of back to Sophia and my production background is that the movie was designed to be flexible because if that stuff didn't work, then the scene kind of is problematic. Like you can't shoot on the beach in a rainstorm because it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So that was another part of it was to be able to be flexible with the scenes that we shot. And I really think we had about 3 days of sun, and it was just one of those things where, hey, that beach scene's coming up tomorrow because it's going to be sunny. But I think that was the biggest challenge from my point of view.
I was going to say that, I think the fog. I think one of the things, despite all of our production experience, learning that major exterior fog is very fickle. I think that was a very big challenge. That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, and also on our budget, what would be? There's like a Christopher Nolan movie. I think it's Insomnia. They have amazing fog scenes, but it's like, well, that movie's got 30 times the amount of money it's like it probably. And it's not just time, it's not just money, but it's also the time. So it's like, we have a very limited window of filming, and then they have probably, we had 18 days, they probably have, 100 days, and they can be more, you can adjust you can shift that big ship if you got more time to do it. But yeah, we learned that about fog. Oy.
Yeah. That has come up on my most recent project. I was like, you guys, I can speak from experience. This is not a way you really want to go.
Yeah,
it's not going to work. So.
It's tough. And I mean, the Cape Cod is the geography of it. It's is it not an isthmus? What is it? Anyway, or peninsula.
Peninsula.
And you it's very exposed to the elements, and that's what that's what's beautiful about it. But that's also it's very fragile, which is then ties into some of the themes of the movie. So it all kind of works.
One of the things I liked about the movie was I like the fact that even though it is a horror movie, it doesn't rely solely on what we can traditional horror elements, and you do have body horror and you do have gore to a certain extent, but you don't overemphasize them, and you don't really introduce them until you feel like you need to for the service of the story. What were some of the challenges in terms of coming up with some of the makeup effects and other effects for the film?
Well, I mean, so I'll jump in for a sec here. One thing I learned is I don't think they make a ton of horror movies in the Northeast in New York. New York indie films, at least in the 20 years I did it, I only worked on, I think, maybe one horror film. I mean, Larry Fessenden does a bunch of them, but there's not a huge pool of effects artists. And so that was something that I learned kind of surprisingly, that it's like there's a couple guys you can go to, and then they kind of do them all in this area. And I think a challenge was expressing things that weren't typical horror tropes and communicating those kind of ideas was a challenge for me. And I think by the end of it, I learned some things about how I would do them differently. But that was challenging. And I think restraint was a key word, in my mind, primarily because it's like, what if you overdo the gore right off the bat, the audience becomes numb to it, as extreme as it goes. And I wanted the gore and the effect. I wanted us to know the characters and to surprise the audience, because I'm a horror fan much more than Sophia. I don't think Soph is a horror fan at all. But I
kind of think that the fact that I'm not a horror fan actually, really brings some balance to the movie. And I mean, that's where I was like, I pushed Jeff to like always make things they could have their own internal logic, but they always had to follow their own logic, and so it couldn't just be like Chubby Rain and Bowfinger or something where you're like, what? You're like, what? Wait, what? Now this happened? What? That's my speaking up for the non-horror fans. Although I would say I do thoroughly enjoy getting completely grossed out by our own movies. So.
And we saw one of the Alien movies, like Covenant, after the last day of filming. Sophia's a great audience for horror films because she's like, oh my god,
yeah.
But the other thing about Sophia though is that both Compliance and Take Shelter, and this is something we talked about very early in the process, with just like a little bit more pepper in them, they're horror films. Compliance is extremely unpleasant, and Take Shelter is extremely intense. I think watching Take Shelter in the theater it's a very intense movie. And so that was something for me, is to take her knowledge of those films and to graft it onto what is a traditional, horror idea or horror script. I thought that was another thing that I hadn't really seen in horror films before, and something that I kind of wanted to see. And that hopefully the audience would get on board with that instead of being like, and I think that horror fans like surprises. So, I hope that we surprise
them. So one last thing for me, the actual release of this is happening at a very interesting time that certainly none of us could have predicted, with a pandemic actually occurring. What is it? Is it surreal to have this movie being made available at this particular time, or is there any particular feelings that come up when it comes to that, the timing of this?
So, if you want to go first?
I mean, it's funny, I personally, having been for the most part in isolation for the last 3 months, I've been able to, as we've gone along and things have improved, like, I've gotten to see people outdoors or socially distanced or whatever, but it really is interesting because I feel like this is, it's funny how the experience of working, with Jeff on like feedback for the script and the sense of isolation and the sense of danger that is lurking outside. That was always something that we wanted to stress because we had limited resources for a monster. So it's like if the atmosphere is what's going to get you, I mean, it's kind of almost uncanny. The parallels where, in the early weeks, it's like, should I leave my house at all? Like, if I breathe wrong, before people started wearing masks widely, and even, obviously, even now there's, a cultural divide over wearing masks. But, in the early weeks when it was like kind of unclear whether people should wear masks, it's like, am I risking things by just going to the store once every 3 weeks? And it's a really bizarre parallel, to be, I mean, we can't see it like the fog, but it's out there, and it's like, is it going to get me? And, and you also don't know we only now are we starting to get the contours of COVID-19, but even so, there isn't a full understanding of it, and so I do really appreciate that, that our lead character as a scientist is like trying to figure out the shape of the monster that's threatening her, and I feel like there's parallels there as well. So,
and to pick up, I mean, first off, it's a horrible irony, that it's coming out when it's coming out. I mean, it was supposed, we knew it was going to come out around this time back in September, and if whatever the appropriateness of the release, if that could be sacrificed so that nobody has COVID, of course, that's what we want. It's horror is the id of whatever, a movie like Get Out is also an expression of the id, and this is when one of the things I wanted to write it was I wanted to make it essentially the nightmare of a young woman.
Yeah.
And in kind of studying about climate change, one of the repercussions of climate change is, pandemic type situations. And so to take kind of those anxieties that somebody who's concerned about the future and then take what that nightmare would feel like. And that was I mean, that was a basic thematic concern to me, is just to take, the characters are, they're people that they kind of remember, that Randall had met years ago. So it's like you have weird dreams where people that you haven't seen in years just show up. And so it's like a weird sense of deja vu. And then on top of that, just kind of a surreal, taking normal things and combining them in weird ways, like a true like surreal approach to storytelling. And I hope that I don't want to be seen as exploiting contemporary situations, and I don't think that that's the case, because it's not knowing how when we made it and how all that. But I would hope in this, I think that there's a possibility for a time of reflection in our country. And I think the film hopefully inspires that type of reflection of not just, who we are as individuals, but who we are as a country and as a planet. I'm a firm believer that it's a global world. I think that distinctions between governments and countries is really arbitrary, because we're all kind of these problems we're having are they're on a global scale, and so that to try to convey that type of sensibility, it is, Emily says, she likes astrobiology, to kind of see the world from an astrobiological standpoint, and to convey almost a sense of the deep history of the planet, in 88 minutes with 4 characters. That was like, if we can even scratch that surface, then I think we've accomplished, something that we set out to, that maybe, even Sophia and I, when we had our, the first kind of, I think, dinner somewhere, and we're like, hey, let's make a movie, if all these things come throughout, then we've accomplished something. So,
well, and I think one of the things that, I think one of the things that I've typically come to understand as far as horror is that it can be sort of a release of our own anxieties to watch horror on the screen. And I think that's where something like this can have value. But I did want to say, before we wrap up, that one of the things I did appreciate about the movie a great deal was that Emily is not your typical quote unquote final girl in a horror movie, where there's an intelligence to the character, there's an awareness of what possibly might be happening, and this intent desire to understand what is happening that I think that really appealed to me about the character, and I think it's one of the reasons that the movie ultimately has the impact that it does, because of the fact that you're not just following a character who just is almost helpless in this situation. She's figuring things out based on her personal knowledge of astrobiology that and of science, that she doesn't feel helpless like a lot of final girls in horror movies do. So that's one of the things I really liked about the movie.
I think that also it was something with Sophia that we talked about in casting, is that we really wanted people to feel real.
Yeah.
And this is also a testament to Liana's performance, is that it's like in movies where you have, especially, I think, characters that play scientists, where they're, whoever wrote the words they're saying, knows what they're talking about. But then you're kind of like, when you watch them, you're like, I don't know if she's quite grasping. But I think it's a testament to Liana, to her performance, is that you buy it, you believe her in every situation in the movie. She's a very, very talented actress. But I think the whole cast did, they all did a great job. And especially, both Liana and Noah's performances, they're very physical. Horror films are very physical on actors to make, and they're both just, they were very physical and game for, just about anything. So, but yeah, I'm glad that, you responded to that. And that was also something from, Sophia, we just don't like it when the audience is always smarter than the character, where it's like, all right, well, she's going to get hit by a car, but it's like, but these are, very conscious decisions that I'm glad you responded that way. And I'm glad that that it came through in the movie. But cool.
Jeff also, created a villain, so to speak, that's not it's not human, so it's not there to punish a girl for being a sexual person, know? So there's no moralizing here. The fog gets everybody, so the transformation is spreading, and so I think that helps as well. But Liana's performance for sure is just super grounded, and you believe absolutely that she's just like a incredibly bright college student who has a lot ahead of her before insanity happens, so. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm glad I was able to talk to you guys about the Beach House. I'm looking forward to seeing what the reaction is going to be when people have a chance to see it.
Thank you. And Brian, a score recommendation. I see that I saw on your blog that you're a big fan of composers.
Yes.
Do you know them? Have you seen the movie Midnight Run?
I cannot say that I have.
Okay, so it's De Niro and Charles Grodin.
Yes.
Danny Elfman does the score, and it is unlike any of his other scores. And it is, if you watch the movie and try to take the score away from the movie, it's like it is so it's so important to the movie. It's a great movie, and the score in particular, it's like Danny Elfman never really did that sort of thing again. So I think if you're into scores like that, I would definitely check that one out.
Yes, I will be sure to do so. I didn't realize Danny Elfman composed that score.
Right, it's weird. It's weird.
So.
Yeah, it's a subtly smart movie. The script is very, very good.
Okay.
But anyway, thank you so much, Brian.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Right.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.